Hi everyone, this is Studio Slave on behalf of ADSR, and in this video we're going to take a look at the new Wavetable synthesizer in Ableton Live 10. So as you can see, we've got a whole ton of presets that are categorized into these folders here, and I think this is going to be a new firm favorite over the likes of Operator for a lot of you, just because it's so easy to use and it's capable of so many different sounds. So I'll just play you the default preset real quick. You can hear we have a nice sine wave there. Okay, so just as a general overview, this new Wavetable synth is a stock plugin, so you don't have to go and pay any extra for it. You get this with Live, and although my CPU is running quite high because of the screen recording and a few other things, Wavetable is actually optimized to be low on CPU usage. So that means you can run plenty of instances of this and you're not going to crash your Ableton project. So we have two oscillators, and we also have a sub oscillator as well, and then we also have some unison controls which we're going to dive into in a second. For those of you that don't know, what a Wavetable synthesizer is it's essentially a table of loads of different waves. So it's got one periodic cycle of each of these waves, and what you can do is you can flick through it. So if you're thinking about massive, you have the knobs where you can dial your way through. If you have serum, you can actually see slices of the wavetable which you can work your way through. So this one is more similar to serum than massive because we have this nice little visual display and it allows us to flick our way through each of the different waves. So as you can see with this default preset, we've got the sine wave, and then we can go up into a ramp and then push that into a square wave. So straight away, just with the use of this single basic shapes wavetable, we can create almost any sound that we can think of because we've got all of the different waveforms here. And if we combine that with the other functions of this synth, which I'm going to go through shortly, such as the oscillators, the sub oscillator, the detuning, and the very, very in-depth modulation matrix, then we can get some real interesting evolving textures that will be pretty hard to get if you just use something such as an FM or a subtractive synth. This yellow line that we have in the display shows us where we are within the cycle of the wavetable, and then we can use this little fader on the right hand side to move our way through all the different waveforms within that table. And you can see if we modulate this and we maybe choose a different or more complex wavetable, you're really going to see just how powerful this synthesizer is. So I'll just show you some of these presets quickly. On the left we have the different folder categories, and then on the right we have the presets within that folder. So as we just go through some of these folders, you're going to see that if you were going to make a sound, what you could do is dive into a certain instrument or something that you know is going to be roughly in the right area of what you're trying to create. And then you just have to look at the wavetable, and you can see wherever this yellow line is, as it gets more complex, we're going to get a much richer and brighter sound. So we can hear this marimba go from dull to bright, and we have these strings which are just going to evolve as we work our way through the wavetable. So it's time to now dive a bit deeper into every function of the Wavetable synth. So to do this, I'm going to set this to basic waves, and I'm going to demonstrate starting with a saw wave just for simplicity. First off, we have the volume fader. And then we have the panning knob on the top left. And we can double click to reset that. We then have the oscillator wavetable position on a fader, and then we've also got the numerical value underneath for modulation or automation as well. And what we also have here is we have a sub oscillator as well. So if I play a higher note, we can see we can set the octave of this. And then we can also bring in some tones as well. So if you listen, I'll do it with a sine wave to make it a bit more obvious. And then we also have a transpose here, and that's not for this sub, that's actually for the whole instrument, so just to show you. Then we also have the ability to change the presets using these two arrows here, and then we also have a different way of viewing the waveform. So we've got this graph type time domain view, and then we've also got this vector view here. So a good way of thinking of this vector view is that rather than the time domain be along a timeline, it's now wrapping itself around 360 degrees, so one full cycle of the waveform is one full cycle of the circle, or 360 degrees. Finally, for each oscillator, we have a dedicated oscillator effects section. So for both of them, we have FM, classic, or modern. So FM is the standard frequency modulation, and that's just frequency modulating itself, so you can modulate two with one and vice versa. We've then got classic mode, which is oscillator sync and pulse width modulation, and then we've got the modern mode, which is fold and warp effects. Got the tune and the amount. So straight away, if you're after any metallic or bell-like textures or anything that's inharmonic, then FM is the way you want to go. And this is a bipolar control, so that means it goes both polarities, which means we can give some instant grit by going into the minus. So I'll just show you this. So as you can hear, if you don't want to use the sub-oscillator but you want some bass, then FM is a great way to do it in the negative polarity. So now looking at the classic mode, we've got the pulse width and we've got the oscillator sync. So if we push the oscillator sync up, you can hear we can actually get extra harmonics here. So if we just push this up to 33%, you can see we've got double. Then we could go up to 66, or we could push it all the way up to 100%, and we're just getting those extra harmonics. And then we've also got the pulse width, which many of you are going to be used to from other synthesizers. And we can see that in the display, just pushing it to the side, which is going to be changing the pulse width. And then we have the modern mode as well, which is our warp and our fold. And I'd say these are a bit more experimental, so you just have to play around with them and see what sort of sounds you can create. But generally, as you increase these settings, you're going to get more brighter harmonics and more interesting textures, which you're going to want to filter down afterwards. So just so you can see what fold is doing here, it's sort of mirroring the image. And as you'd expect, as that yellow line gets more complicated, we're getting a lot more brighter harmonics the more we fold that waveform in on itself. Now if we tab across to the next oscillator, you see we've got this device activator. It's exactly the same as the first. We've also got the semitone detune and the sense detune on both oscillators as well. And what we can do with this is we can detune them against each other. So we'll go for some saw waves. And then we'll take this to a saw wave as well. So now we have both of our oscillators. And we'll detune this 7 semitones. So we'll go for a nice fifth. We'll get some dead mouse type sound. And I'll also detune the semitones as well, so we get a beating effect. And that gives us a nice chorus sound. So treating wavetable synthesis in a subtractive way, we've built up our rich harmonic sound, and what we're going to do now is filter that down with the filter section. So we've got two multi-mode filters here, and you can see we've got our filter types here, so we can change these. We've also got our different slopes, and if we click down on the drop down, then we can see we've got all of the different modes, and we've even got the morph as well for both filters. We've also got the device activator button, and we can also click here to change the filter slope between a 12 or 24 decibel per octave filter. And then we also have the second filter, filter 2. And the way this second filter works is going to depend entirely on this setting here. So if you need to see what's going on, you've got this little diagram, which is going to make things a bit clearer. So in serial mode, it goes into one filter, then into the next. So we could have one all the way open. We could have the second one all the way closed on a low pass as well. And we're not going to hear very much. And likewise, if we did it the other way around, we're also not going to hear very much, because it's got to go through both of the filters. We could go for parallel, which, as you can see, we've got both of the oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 are going to both of these filters, so we get a bit of a mixture between the two. And the final one is split. And as you can imagine, with split, oscillator 1 goes to filter 1, oscillator 2 goes to filter 2. So just to show you this, just turn oscillator 1 off, we've got oscillator 1. And as you can hear, that is assigned solely to filter 1, and filter 2 is not working on oscillator 1. And then if we switch these over, vice versa, oscillator 2 and filter 2 are linked, but not filter 1. So that's the filter section covered, and now we can go across to the next section where we have our mod sources, which are things such as our amps, our envelopes, and our LFOs. We have the matrix, which is a grid where we can assign all of the different modulations, and then we have the MIDI, which is things for like aftertouch, pitch, bend, and anything else we want to assign. And if we look at the mod sources, we've got the standard envelopes, we've got amp envelope, envelope 2, envelope 3, and we've got some LFOs as well, which are assignable. And the good thing about with how these are assigned, if we go to the matrix, then what we click on is going to come up here and allow us to assign, and then we just work on a grid. So if I wanted to do the oscillator 1 position here, and I wanted to send that to envelope 2, I'll just push this up. We'll go for quite a high amount, and we can see that this is now modulating our oscillator wavetable position. So what we could do is we could rein that in because it's a bit too much. That's enough, just a nice bit of modulation. We can go to our mod sources, we can look at envelope 2. We've got things such as attack here. So now the modulation is going to slowly increase as we trigger the sound. So we can see after 3 seconds, it's going to be at full modulation. We can set this to hertz, as I've got here. I'm going to open the filter a bit. Or I could set this to tempo sync. We can also control the amount and the shape here as well. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to push the amount all the way up, and we can control that from here. And then we also have the shape control here as well, which once again is a bipolar control. So it goes into the negative and the positive, and we can use this on any of the 5 waveforms that we've got to use as an LFO. And then finally, we've got re-trigger. So that just means, is it going to get re-triggered on a note or not? So you can see it's basically just cycling all the time in the background. So we also have some other modulation options, such as the envelopes. So we'll carry on working on that dead mouse style pluck that we were working on. I'll just pull the filter down. We'll put an arpeggiator in for context, and then maybe a little bit of reverb as well. What I really like about these modulation options and sources is that it allows us to use the mod matrix to modulate lots of different parameters, all using the same modulation source. And as well as that, if we look at the bottom, we see we get the ADSR timing values, but we also get the slope and the value parameters as well, which is similar to operator. So now if we go to envelope 2, and what we can do is we can click on the parameter we want to assign. So I'll just click on the frequency, go to the mod matrix, and there it is. And I'll just push up envelope 2, which is now mapped to the filter 1 frequency, and I can set how much I want it to be mapped to. And if I go back to the mod matrix, you can actually see the envelopes and the LFOs firing at the top as well, so it gives you a nice visual representation of exactly what is going on with your modulation options. So I'm sure you can imagine the automation possibilities for making a track using this technique. And what we also have is different ways of firing our envelopes. So if we go to loop, we can actually turn our arpeggiator off, and we can actually get a rhythmic pattern going just using our envelope. So I'll just tighten up this loop. But now I'll keep that envelope as it was, and I'll just play something in. So what I'll actually do now is I'll get that in here into the arrangement using the capture function. So all I've got to do is play the MIDI that I want to play, hit the capture button, and without having to record, it's now saved that information into the arrangement. And you can see I wasn't quite on time, but just with a quick bit of editing, we've got that in place, and it just saves me having to mess around trying to record and potentially forgetting what keys to press to get the same pattern. So let's just clean this up real quick. So I'll just tidy up a few of these notes. And the sound is pretty good, but it's not fitting with that loop, so I'm just going to solo that now while we carry on demonstrating a few of the other features such as the MIDI tab. So what we also have is we have the aftertouch and the pitch bend. So I could set this once again to anything I wanted to. So we'll go for the velocity. And I'm just going to use the pitch bend on the keyboard. And this is already assigned to pitch as well, so this might sound a little bit strange. And if you look at the top where we have the writing for velocity, pitch bend, modulation, you can see there's a little bar which is actually showing us where the modulation is. So you can see me using the pitch bend and the mod wheel here, and we can also see the velocity as well as we go through the different notes. You can see that jumping around. We've also got the polyphony. So if we were playing chords, then we could set this to mono. And we've also got the glide feature here. And for the glide to work, we need to have a bit more sustain to be able to hear the notes sliding around. So that's something that I'll save for the next video where we're going to make a patch. Next up, we've got the unison feature. So what I'm going to do to demonstrate this and make it real obvious is I'm going to turn off one of our oscillators. And now you'll really be able to hear the settings as I push up the voices and the amount. So you've got plenty of different modes here. You can see we've got classic, shimmer, noise, phase sync, position spread, and random note. So depending on what you're looking for, if you're looking for phasing, thickness, or width, then this is the place that you want to head and to add that unison and those voices. So I'll just go through some of these different modes now at different voices and different amounts so you can get a feeling for how it sounds. And something to be aware of with this is that it is going to change the stereo image quite a lot. You can get some phasing, so always make sure you check that once you've got your setting, as you might need to rein it in slightly with the width afterwards. So just to recap on all the sections then, we said we've got our sub area here, we have our oscillator with our two different views, we have our other second oscillator, we have our two multi-mode filters, we then have our mod matrix, and we can just click whatever we want to automate and it's going to appear in the modulation area. Then what we also have is the mod sources, amp, envelope 2, envelope 3, LFO1 and LFO2. And then we've also got the MIDI, such as aftertouch, velocity, note, and whatever else. And finally, we've got our volume and our unison. A nice little handy feature as well is this global section here. So rather than having to go into the envelope and automate things at this level, what we can actually do is have our settings where we want them, go into the matrix, and if I just play this again. So if you know your way around Operator and the multiband dynamics device, then you're going to be quite familiar with these global time values anyway. The final thing I want to show you, which makes this synth absolutely outstanding, is this little button here. And what this does is it breaks it out and we can go full screen. So if you decide you're going to go and do some sound design, then this is definitely the way to go. This means we no longer have to jump between all these different menus. And as you can see, they're popped up here. We get the ADSR envelopes down the bottom. We can jump between the slopes and the values. Or we could also do that by clicking on these buttons here. And pretty much everything we need to see is right here. And what's also handy with this is that if we don't want to use up all of the screen, say we need to use the arrangement, what we can do is we can collapse this down. And as it collapses down, what it's going to do is it's going to start to populate the windows again. So the oscillators will go first. And then you can see we've still got our modulation sources here. And if we go further, that'll pop down as well. And then once again, we can just pop that open and straight away we can now work in the arrangement view. So if we're looping a part of the arrangement that we need to work on, then we can go on our clip, we can press Z to zoom in and we can work on that. And we've still got the entire wavetable synth there that we can tweak away, or we can create some automation nodes if we need to. without having to collapse or open different tabs. So in this video, we went through every single feature and function of the Wavetable synth, and in the next video, we're going to create a patch in a more practical sense to fit with our project.